I very strongly suspect that I have ADHD. You're under no obligation to tell your employer if you've had a recent diagnosis. I would think about whether or not you want that diagnosis and what it will mean for you if you get it. I'm sort of somebody who has never stayed in any one job for a huge length of time, which is quite common in a lot of people with ADHD.
On this week's episode of The Engaging Marketeer, I'm speaking with Aileen Carson, who is a neurodiversity trainer and speaker. Aileen works with businesses on how they can be better prepared and help neurodivergent members of staff, but she also works with neurodivergent people on how they can get better at portraying themselves and working better in the workplace to be the best versions of themselves. So you are a neurodiversity trainer and speaker. There'll
Yes.
be people who will hear the word neurodiversity and just think it means autism. There'll be other people who don't know what easy for me to say, neurodiversity means. So could you just very, very succinctly explain what neurodiversity encompasses?
Yes, so neurodiversity is the natural variation in how our brains work. So we all process information differently, we all experience the world differently, and that's a completely natural variation in how our brains work. So there's no right or wrong way of thinking or of processing information, of experiencing the world. Neurodiversity does encompass, or it covers a large variety of different sort of conditions or neurotypes, such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, and lots more. So I suppose basically it's about how our brains work and the fact that our brains all work differently.
So as you mentioned, all of our brains work differently. Everybody is slightly different from somebody else. So does that mean everybody to some degree is neurodiverse?
It's a really interesting question, and there's always lots to debate about that. One of the things that tends to determine whether somebody's neurodivergent or not is that while we all have strengths and weaknesses, neurodivergent people tend to have larger gaps between their strengths and weaknesses. So this is called a spiky profile. So if you're neurodivergent, you will have a spiky profile, which basically means that there are much larger gaps between your strengths and weaknesses. If you're neurotypical, there tends to be much smaller gaps, so you won't really have a spiky profile. It'll be much flatter.
Have you got an example of as you say, everybody's different, but an example of the kind of things that people would be really good at versus the kind of things they would be very bad at?
Yes, yeah. I mean, although everybody is different, there are some commonalities. So very often neurodivergent people tend to be very creative. They may be very good at problem solving. Some people, particularly those with ADHD, can be very good at being hyper-focused, just being so completely focused on what they're doing that you don't notice the time passing. The kinds of things that people have more difficulty with tend to be around their executive functions. So that's things like memory, concentration, time management, sort of those kinds of things. So the kinds of things that we need on a daily basis to help us, I suppose, achieve our goals, to help us through our every day-to-day work. So that was not a very good explanation there. So there are some commonalities. So whilst everybody is different, things like creativity, problem solving, spotting patterns that perhaps other people don't see, these can often be really good strengths in neurodivergent people. But it's the executive function type things like memory, concentration, focus, time management, all these kinds of things. They tend to be harder for neurodivergent people.
So how would somebody know if they were neurodivergent?
You would need, if you wanted a diagnosis, that would usually be done by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be aware there's very, very long waiting lists for assessments. Lots of people, myself included, suspect that they're neurodivergent even without a diagnosis. So
you've not had a diagnosis yourself, even though you work in this field and you suspect that you're right.
Yes, I don't have a diagnosis, partly because it was sort of much later in life when I realised that I probably was neurodivergent. So I very strongly suspect that I have ADHD. Now, I've never done anything about seeking a diagnosis, partly because for me, I don't really feel that I need one. I think it would be different if I wasn't running my own business, perhaps, and if I was employed somewhere. A diagnosis might be more helpful for me. You don't need a diagnosis, I should say, to ask for any adjustments at work. But I think it might be more helpful for me personally, if I was an employee somewhere. But because I run my own business, I have a lot more flexibility. I can make adjustments whenever I need. I can work at a time of day that suits me best. I can do different types of work at types of the different times of day that suit me best. So I've never really felt the need for a diagnosis. But knowing a lot about ADHD and about neurodiversity in general, I have self-diagnosed, if you like, which is absolutely valid.
Yeah. Well, I imagine for you, as you are a speaker in neurodiversity, it sounds a strange way to say this, but it might add to your credibility if you were diagnosed as neurodivergent.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I often think that, particularly I run training courses as well, and I'm also a coach with neurodivergent people. So I often think that if I actually had that diagnosis, then that possibly would give me more credibility. It's never been an issue for me, as far as I'm aware. I don't think anybody has decided not to work with me because I don't have that diagnosis. But a lot of the people I work with don't have a diagnosis either. And there are such long waiting lists. You know, if you're trying to get an assessment on the NHS, you can go private, but obviously that will cost money. Not everybody can afford that. And also with some private providers, there are long waiting lists as well.
Really?
So whilst it will still be a quicker process, you might still have to wait for a while as well. So there are various reasons why not all neurodivergent people have a diagnosis. There are also people out there who are neurodivergent, but who might not know that they're neurodivergent. You know, they might just never have come up against perhaps any barriers or any sort of invisible barriers that might be there. And some people don't want a diagnosis, and that's absolutely fine as well. For some people, it's very important. They want to be able to put a name to what it is that they're experiencing. And for some people, not everybody knows you don't need a diagnosis to request adjustments at work. So some people feel that they need to have that diagnosis in order to have a conversation with their employer or their manager, although it's not actually necessary.
I imagine putting the name to it would help you understand what your requirements were, whereas before you might not know, you might be uncertain of what would be beneficial to you and what wouldn't.
Yeah, it can be a really difficult question, I think, for both managers and for their team members, because sometimes people don't know what would help. You know, they might be aware that they're having difficulties in a particular area. They might not know what they're entitled to. They might not know what they can ask for. And in terms of the workplace, there might be a lot of fear or anxiety involved in actually bringing this to someone's attention, you know. So sometimes people who think that they might be neurodivergent or who have had a recent diagnosis might not be sure how safe it is to mention that to their work. And for good reason. You know, I mean, I've worked with people who have lost their jobs because they've been neurodivergent. I've worked with people who have been told that they won't progress with their career. So there are very good reasons why somebody might not want to draw attention to themselves. You know, they might not want to say to their employer that they've had a diagnosis. And I think for managers, it could be difficult as well, because sometimes managers want to help. They might notice that somebody appears to be having difficulties in a particular area. They might want to help, but they might not be sure how to do it. They might not know what kind of questions to ask, you know, whether to mention anything at all, you know, particularly if that person hasn't come to them. So there can be lots of reasons why these conversations don't take place in the workplace.
I can appreciate that. My daughter, how long is she now? She's 23 now. A few years ago, she was insistent she had ADHD and she wanted to be diagnosed for it. Presumably, it's easier for children to get diagnosed than adults, I would assume, maybe not. But we decided not to because I was worried how it would affect her going into university and employment if she was diagnosed. But the other point I wanted to make before you answer that one was, it's not like a CCJ or a criminal conviction, presumably. If you do get diagnosed with ADHD, you don't have to disclose it at every opportunity and let people know.
No, absolutely. You don't have to disclose it to anybody. You might choose to, and that's fine, but you don't have to. And in terms of the workplace, again, you're under no obligation to tell your employer if you've had a recent diagnosis, or even if you think that you might have ADHD or be of any other neurotype. And just in your sort of question there about sort of children and adults, there are a lot more people who are being diagnosed in adulthood, mainly because they were missed in childhood. So I think now there's more awareness, and there are certain things that might be picked up earlier in children now. I mean, when I think back to when I was at school a very, very long time ago, I mean, there would have undoubtedly been some neurodivergent children in my class, but it wouldn't have been picked up. I don't think these things were really talked about then. People didn't have that same awareness or that same knowledge, whereas now there's a lot more awareness. And that's one of the reasons why more people are coming forward for assessments, because they've recognised that there may be something in them. What sometimes happens as well is that if a child has a diagnosis, the parents may then start to think, oh, actually, they may recognise some signs of themselves in their children. So that can get adults starting to question whether or not they're neurodivergent as well. And that may prompt them to seek a diagnosis themselves. So there are a lot of adults out there who are sort of either being diagnosed or starting to think that they could be neurodivergent themselves and trying to figure out whether a diagnosis would be helpful for them. And I think, with a diagnosis, whilst it's a very personal decision whether to go through the assessment or not, it can open doors. It can, if you need, like, for example, some people with ADHD are on medication. Without that diagnosis, you're not going to get that medication. So it can open doors for treatment or support that you might find it much harder to access without a diagnosis.
I imagine there's some sections of the media that are not helping matters at all. You mentioned that there were children in school when you were in school that clearly were neurodivergent, but it wasn't picked up. I can certainly think of somebody when I was in primary school who was absolutely neurodivergent, but it wasn't picked up. But you get people of a certain age saying things like, oh, autism didn't exist when I was in school, or vaccine must cause autism because we didn't have vaccines when I was in school, and now we do, and now people are autistic. It's like, well, it did exist. You just didn't know about it. So that can't help with the whole making it acceptable to be diagnosed and making it okay to talk about it, surely.
Yeah, it just adds to the stigma. There is still a stigma attached to neurodivergence, and misinformation, or some of the things that are out there in the news, in the media, social media. I think you have to be very careful where you're getting your information from. So there are lots of trusted sources out there, but there are also so many people who are just exactly as you say, it's like, oh, everybody's autistic these days, everybody's got ADHD these days, or, oh, we never had that in my day. We've always been here. It's just that these things weren't picked up before. So it's not a new thing. Neurodivergence has been around for a very, very long time. There may just not have been a name for it many, many years ago. There wouldn't have been the same kind of awareness. It would have been a lot harder for people. But I think it's important that if you are thinking that you might be neurodivergent, it's important to get the right information out there, because there are so many sections of the media where the information is not helpful. It also doesn't help when you have people in the public eye who use neurodivergence as an excuse for some very bad behaviour. There are people who are genuinely struggling and not using any excuses, but when you get people in the public eye saying, oh, I did this because I'm autistic, or I did this because I have ADHD, that just doesn't help. That just kind of amplifies some of the stereotypes and the stigma surrounding neurodiversity.
There's a really good social media, you call him a social media personality. He's done work with councils and stuff like that. His son's autistic. And every now and then he shares this post that he made probably 4 or 5 years ago now, where a woman said to his son that he doesn't look autistic. And the line was, you don't look autistic. Oh, I'm sorry, Luke. Would you please do an autism for the lady?
Yes. Yes, I've seen that one.
You've seen that one, yeah. That's Simon Harris. He's been on this podcast before. He's really good.
Right. Yes, I know. It's so true. There are so many stereotypes out there. And exactly. I think people find that a lot, that they're told that I mean, even by medical professionals, I've had clients who've gone to see their GP to ask for an assessment or to be referred for an assessment, and they've been told, oh, you can't be autistic because you're married and you have a family, or you can't be autistic because
Wow.
you can maintain eye contact, So
Whoa.
that doesn't help
So
either.
autistic people can't get married. That's the lesson there.
Yeah, it's like, well, you can't, you won't find it easy to have relationships with people, or, to maintain eye contact, or, all these kinds of things, or that people with ADHD are always late for things. Some are, but, although I strongly suspect I have ADHD, I'm the opposite of that. I'm never late for anything. I can't bear being late for things. But that's also another sign of ADHD, which I didn't realize, which was one of the reasons I kept telling myself for quite a long time that I couldn't possibly have ADHD, because I'm not late for things, because that's the stereotype, that people with ADHD are always late, can never turn up on time, experience time blindness. And a lot of people do, but not everybody. So there are lots of stereotypes out there. And even people who you'd think would be much more aware of what neurodiversity actually is, some of them, can still be sort of a bit blinkered by some of these stereotypes.
I was just thinking when you said about not being late for something. I'm like that. I cannot be late for anything. I will usually turn up for a networking event or a meeting a good half an hour beforehand, sometimes an hour beforehand, because I do not want to walk into a room full of people. I want to be the first person in the room and have other people walk in. That way I feel comfortable.
Yep, I'm exactly the same, actually. If there's a small number of people there, that's fine. Walking into a room which is full of people, because it's trying to start that initial conversation when everybody else is already involved in a conversation is really difficult. So I'm always early for that reason. But also I just have this thing about being late. I cannot be late for anything. And if I'm waiting for somebody and they're running late, the anxiety that fills me with is incredible,
It's curious because you mentioned that not being late. The former footballer, very famous man, David Beckham.
Oh, yes.
He has a compulsion where he cannot be late for anything. And there was somebody played a practical joke. I think it was James Corden played a practical joke on him where he deliberately delayed him so that he was late for a particular meeting. And it drove him nuts.
Yeah, that would freak me out so much. That's my worst nightmare, of being late for something. Yeah, and if somebody else makes me late as well. My husband is much more relaxed about timekeeping than I am, so he's got wise to this now. But if we were ever going out somewhere together, I would tell him that we needed to leave about half an hour earlier than we actually did.
I do that.
It doesn't work anymore though, because we've been together a long time. And he now knows exactly what I'm doing.
I stagger people based on how late I know they're going to be. I'll tell my sister an hour beforehand. I tell my son half an hour beforehand, and I tell my daughter on the right time. Yeah, wow, look at that. Weird. You mentioned speaking to your GP about being diagnosed. There's going to be people listening to this who'll be thinking, am I neurodiverse? I don't know. How do they go about it if they want to be diagnosed? What are the steps?
Yeah, I mean, really the first port of call usually is the GP. So going along to your GP, explaining why you think that you might need an assessment and asking for a referral. I would think about whether or not you want that diagnosis and what it will mean for you if you get it. It is a very long process. I mean, it's because of the waiting list, people can be waiting for years and years. So I think I would be realistic, if you are looking for a diagnosis, being very realistic about how long it could take. Also, the systems are different depending on what part of the country you're in. So if you're in England, it's a different system than if you're in Scotland. So basically your GP would be the first port of call for a referral, and then after that you would be referred to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And the assessment process is different depending on what neurotype you think you might be. But it's nothing happens quickly. So I would maybe think about why you want the diagnosis, what you think it might do for you. Will it open doors for treatment or support if you think that's what you need, or is it more just for you just want sort of peace of mind? You want to know that there's something going on. What is it? But also as well, perhaps being prepared that when you do go through the assessment process, you possibly might not get the result that you're expecting. It might be that you're not neurodivergent. I was working with somebody recently who had an assessment for autism, and it turned out that he wasn't autistic. But so I think perhaps just preparing yourself that it is a lengthy process, or it can be a lengthy process, and you may or may not get the results you're looking for.
But even getting an appointment with your GP is difficult.
Yes, I mean, even that can take a while. So yeah, exactly.
Is there any preliminary stuff you can do for that? Because you said go in and explain what it is that you think you might have. I think I might have ADHD, or I think I might have autism, or whatever it may be. What if you've got no idea? You just think, I'm a bit different to other people. I know I'm a bit different to other people, but I don't really know how or in what way. And I don't want to put a label on it because I've got no real idea. Mm-hmm. How can I get an indication before I even speak to a GP of what I think I might have?
I would think about the kinds of things that you might be finding difficult, the reasons why you've noticed that you're different to the people around you. What is it that makes you think that you're different? You might do things differently. You might feel different to other people. So perhaps just thinking about what is it that makes you different, and what difficulties are you having. So I think the more information you can give your GP, then the easier it's going to be for them to think, okay, so what kind of assessment might this person need? So I think just having an idea of what it is that you're finding difficult, even if you don't know, even if you can't put a name to it yourself, I mean, that's absolutely fine. But just having a think about, what is it that's difficult for you. And also as well, we often talk about the difficulties, and I think with neurodivergence, people talk a lot about sort of perceived deficits, but neurodivergent people have real strengths as well. So it might be that you've noticed that you're exceptionally good at something, and the people around you are maybe not so good at that. So whilst looking at the difficulties, it is very much something that people often focus on, I think it's just as important to look at the strengths that you're having as well. So that could be another difference between you and perhaps the people around you. You might also have neurodivergent relatives. So, if perhaps one of your parents is neurodivergent, you might have noticed some common traits between you and your mum or dad. A lot of parents, when they have a child who's diagnosed, they notice sort of traits within them that they've also spotted within their child. So, there could be all sorts of things that you might have picked up on. And I think the more information you can give someone like your GP, the easier it will be for them.
Like lining all the cars up in a row, or separating all the sweets into colour before you eat them, that kind of thing.
Something like that.
Something like that. You keep mentioning tests and assessment. I'm thinking in my head, what on earth is that? I mean, are we putting our fingers into electrical stuff? Are we getting scans? Are we doing quizzes? Are we looking at colour blots and saying what we think they are? What sort of tests are these? Because I've got fear of what these might be, you see.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, having not been through the assessment or any assessment myself.
You need to do it. Get through the assessment.
Lots and lots of questions. Sometimes parents might be involved if parents are still alive. It can be really helpful for the person doing the assessment, not just to hear from you, but also to hear from the people close to you. And they may well, and particularly looking back at your childhood as well, seeing how you how you grew up, how you presented, what was going on for you, what your behaviours were like when you were a child. So it won't necessarily just involve you. It could involve your parents or people close to you as well.
Right. And you talked about different skills and things that you're good at. I mean, I take it, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anybody for the benefit of other people listening that don't know the answer. That's the excuse I'm giving anyway. People think of neurodiverse people as being exceptionally good with numbers. Now, presumably that's a myth, and that not all autistic people are maths geniuses that can do long multiplication in their heads within a fraction of seconds. That's my question. Is that a myth? And what are the realities in terms of skills that they could be good at that we don't necessarily know about?
It is a bit of a myth, but there are people out there who are exceptionally good at numbers and who are maths geniuses. There are also people who really struggle with that. So I would say it is very much an individual thing. I mean, there are some sort of typical strengths and challenges, but it is different for everybody. So yeah, the sort of the stereotype that everyone who's autistic is some kind of maths genius is not the case at all. There are some, definitely, but not everybody is. So yeah, there's a lot of myths and stereotypes out there surrounding neurodivergence. Particularly around autism and ADHD, I would say. And that's, I suppose that goes back to what we were saying earlier about the media and social media and getting the right information. And certainly some of the work that I do is about trying to break down some of these stereotypes and getting the right information out there, you know, and increasing awareness and and not just about awareness, but actually hoping that people take action after they learn the facts rather than some of the myths and stereotypes that are out there.
Do you have numbers for, or figures, or even an idea of figures for the number of people, say, in the UK that are classified or diagnosed as neurodivergent, and potentially people that are but haven't been diagnosed?
I don't have numbers, but it's generally thought that about 15 to 20% of the population is neurodivergent.
Really?
So around up to about a fifth of the population.
Wow, that is so much higher than
numbers,
I thought.
Yeah, what it is in numbers, I don't know. I don't know what the population is, but yeah. So
it's about 70 million, I think, the UK population. Wow.
So there's a lot of us there. So in some ways, it's a bit surprising that it's still treated as I was going to say a bit of an oddity. That's not quite what I mean. But, you know, it's still treated as something that's very unusual. But actually, it's not that unusual at all. I think perhaps there's maybe just not been enough knowledge or awareness about it.
Because remember, there's people going around saying it didn't exist in my day. That's
exactly.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
So what exactly then should employers be doing to help with inclusivity within the workplace for neurodivergent members of staff?
I think there's a number of things. Again, sometimes it can be an individual thing, but I think when you're looking at the workplace in general, sometimes there can be various barriers in the workplace that not everybody sees. I mean, just I suppose starting from before you even work somewhere, recruitment processes can sometimes be a barrier. There are certain behavioural expectations in an interview. I know a number of autistic people who have struggled to get through interviews because they found it really difficult to maintain eye contact. The interviewer has made an assumption wrongly that they're not interested or they're not paying attention. So that can be a barrier that if you don't know that some people have real difficulty maintaining eye contact, that could then go against that person. So I think looking at recruitment processes and making sure that they're inclusive. Creating safety in the workplace is a really important one. People will not share that they have a diagnosis or that they think that they might be neurodivergent if it doesn't feel safe to do so. And that's a responsibility of everybody in the organisation, not just the leadership team. So creating that safety within a workplace where people feel safe to share if they want to, that they have a diagnosis, and also that making it safe for them to ask for help or support and know that that won't be held against them. You know, so the next time that it comes up they come up for promotion, that won't be held against them. You know, they will have the same opportunities as other people. There are lots of sort of little things that people can do, you know, to help individuals. For somebody who struggles with sort of noise in an office, for example, noise cancelling headphones, a really simple thing, really easy to do, and that can make a difference. The environment is hugely important. It is for everybody, but it can be particularly important for people who do have some kind of sensory sensitivities. So if you are sensitive to noise or bright lights or smell, then working in an environment which has very strong smells or very bright lights could be really difficult. It can make it much harder for you to work at your best. I talk quite a lot about what people need to work at their best. And I think if employers think, okay, what do all our employees need to work at their best, not just a particular group of employees. I think what some people don't think about is that if you make a workplace inclusive for neurodivergent people, it will be inclusive for everybody. So it's not about preferential treatment for one particular group of people. It's about making a workplace inclusive for everybody who works there. So if workplaces are designed with the needs of the people who use them in mind, then the barriers that I mentioned before, those barriers won't exist. You know, people won't need to ask for adjustments. We're a long way off that, but I think if people just think about, are they unintentionally putting barriers in people's way? Because sometimes these things aren't done intentionally, you know, it can be completely unintentional. So there's lots of things that people can do, but I think just thinking about what are the needs of your employees and what do they need to be able to work at their best. You know, I would say as well, there's also something about making the most of people's strengths. So many of my clients have had real problems in the workplace because their employer has focused very much on the difficulties that they're having. And whilst there may well be a need for that to help put adjustments in place, if you're just focusing on the difficulties or the challenges that someone's facing, you may not be taking their strengths into account. So if people are doing work that is aligned with their strengths and barriers that they face are removed from the workplace, they'll thrive. If there's lots of these barriers in place and the employer or their manager is focusing solely on the difficulties that they're having, it's going to be much harder for them to do their best work.
I was thinking what you're saying then about people with eye contact. I remember we interviewed somebody here maybe 15 years ago now, and he couldn't make eye contact during the interview. His eyes were all over the place, and business partner commented on it saying, "Did you notice how he just couldn't maintain eye contact with us? He couldn't do it at all." But we hired him because the role was for content editor. So reading and editing content and being really good at grammar, and his attention to detail was the best we've ever had. So it is also relevant to the role. So it doesn't matter if somebody can't maintain eye contact if the role that you're actually hiring them for is suited to the skills that you require them for, which is an interesting point. But it hadn't occurred to us at the time that when we're interviewing somebody that couldn't maintain eye contact, that he may have other needs. Didn't occur to us. And I think that's probably something that businesses are lacking, certainly at the interview stage, that you don't necessarily know if someone is doing something that you might consider quirky because they have needs or because they just don't want to be there or they're just not suited to the job. It's something that didn't occur to me.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't occur to a lot of people. And I know that, just having spoken to some of my clients who've really struggled with interviews and with lots of different parts of recruitment processes, it can be really difficult to get past that. They may be absolutely perfect for that role. Sometimes I think as well, employers may ask for things during the recruitment process which are not necessarily part of the job. So they're trying to test lots of different skills. But really, you just want to be testing the skills that that person needs to be able to do the job well. If, for example, I've been asked to do presentations at so many job interviews. Sometimes those jobs didn't require any public speaking or any sort of presentation skills at all, but that was just part of the recruitment process because that's the way it was done. It's always been done like that. Sometimes putting people on the spot can be part of an interview sort of scenario. But if that's not part of the role, then why are you testing for that during the recruitment process? You're absolutely right. You look at what are the skills you need for that job. Does that person have those skills? Just because they can't maintain eye contact or perhaps they're fidgeting a bit, that doesn't mean that they can't do the job. So yeah, I think there's a real lack of awareness, I would say, around recruitment. And that can make it harder for people just to get their foot in the door, never mind getting in there and actually doing the job. But I think when employers are focusing on people's strengths, then and making sure that the people they're hiring have the strengths to do the job, then that's the main thing.
Right now in the UK, and again, a lot of employers don't know this. I've mentioned this on podcasts before when I've spoken to people in recruitment and in HR, that if you interview somebody and you prejudice against them, for example, you get out of them that they're expecting a baby or they're going to have children in the next couple of years, or even that they smoke and you don't give them the job because of that, then you are opening yourself up then to potential legal action because you were prejudiced against them for something that is outside their control. Is there anything right now for neurodiversity if you were to find out that somebody had ADHD, for example, and then not give them the job and hire somebody that had very, very similar skills but didn't have ADHD? Is there any legal protection at the moment for people with neurodiversity when they're going for interviews?
The Equality Act is the one piece of legislation that springs to mind. I would qualify that by saying that I'm not a lawyer, so I wouldn't want to give any legal advice there. But autism and ADHD are almost always classed as disabilities. When you look at the definition of disability within the Equality Act, then autism and ADHD are almost always classed as disabilities. So if you were to discriminate against somebody because they were autistic or had ADHD, you could very well be in breach of the Equality Act. But as I say, that's not legal advice, so that's not my area.
So it's definitely in the employer's interests to be aware of this and to be up on everything and all the requirements that they need, so that you don't inadvertently make mistakes like that. Because quite often when people do, say for example, you ask a candidate if they're expecting a baby, or if they've got family plans, for example, you might not know that that's a question you can't ask. It's just something you genuinely curious about asking. You don't know, so you can accidentally break the law by doing that. And it's the same with neurodiversity. You can accidentally get yourself into trouble and not realise that you're doing it if you are not aware of what you can and cannot ask during an interview.
Yeah.
So what about the other side, the flip side? In terms of candidates, I know you help people as well who are neurodiverse going into the workplace. What advice would you give to somebody that was neurodiverse in terms of going for a job, going for an interview, and portraying themselves in their best light to be able to do the job at the best of their abilities?
It's quite a difficult question to answer because partly for the same reasons that people may or may not want to share with their employer that they have a diagnosis. If you don't know what that employer's like, you may not want to draw attention to the fact that you're neurodivergent, if you have a diagnosis. It's very much a personal decision, I would say. I sometimes get people asking me that sort of type of question, and there are sometimes you might be able to get an idea of how an employer might be likely to respond. So if an employer encourages people to ask for adjustments during the recruitment process, that may give an indication that they are supportive, but not necessarily. You don't know. So I think it's a really difficult thing to answer. And I tend not to give people advice on this kind of thing because it is very much a personal decision. So if it feels that it's safe to disclose something about yourself, if you think that you might need some adjustments in the recruitment process in order for you to come across at your best, then you might want to request those. But it really is a very personal decision because very often you don't know how supportive an employer is before you start working there. So it's a really tricky question to answer.
Well, sure.
And it does come down to how safe people feel, I think.
Surely, though, in a perfect world, and world isn't perfect, in an ideal world, as a candidate looking for a job, if an employer wasn't willing to make the adjustments that I needed, or would prejudice against me if they knew that I had it, then that's not the kind of company I'd want to work for anyway. So you should really be as honest as you possibly can to make sure you get the best fit with the company you work for, and that they're going to support you and help you be the best that you can be.
In an ideal world, yes. I just don't think that always happens. But yeah, no, you're right about if an employer seems very reluctant to make any kind of adjustments, or you just don't get a good feeling about it, then yeah, I would be thinking, no, this is not the right place for me. But as I say, there's lots of reasons why people might not want to share anything personal about themselves. And it's not just about neurodivergence. It could be that someone has a disability or, a chronic illness, or, it could be anything. Certainly personally, I would think long and hard about whether I wanted to share it at that stage. If it was something that perhaps I might need some adjustments for if I got the job, then I might mention it, just to kind of maybe partly to see their reaction. And is that, do I get the sense that they're going to hold that against me or not? But as I say, it's a very personal decision, and I can completely understand why people might not want to share that kind of information about themselves when they don't know how an employer is going to act.
Yeah.
Or respond.
In terms of allowances that somebody that's neurodiverse might need, you mentioned noise cancelling headphones, and you mentioned sensitivity to smells as well. I think from my own son at the moment, he is very sensitive to smells, which is ironic because his room stinks. But he is very sensitive to smells. And we go to the football at Liverpool at Anfield, and whenever we leave, people start smoking outside because they're not allowed to smoke in the ground. It's banned in the ground. although people still do it, and they announce that if you do it, you'll get thrown out. But they don't throw people out. But that's just a bugbear he's got. As soon as we walk out the stadium, people start sparking up cigarettes. He's covering his face as we're walking back to the car because he doesn't want to smell it. He refuses to sit outside at any restaurant or pub or bar for food because people will smoke. He will always sit inside. No matter how hot it is, he will never sit outside. And there's no way he could work here, for example, because one of our staff smokes. They go outside, go for a cigarette, come back in. You can smell it as they walk in. And he would not be able to put up with that. So what are the other kind of allowances that somebody would expect? Or have you seen, I should say, in the workplace that people have, or employers have made for neurodiverse people?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of going along the lines of smell there, I mean, one of the things that somebody could request or an employer might think about is that if somebody is very sensitive to smell and their desk is right outside the kitchen in an office or the staff room where people are eating food, it might be that they don't sit there, that they have a desk that's much further away. So, you know, a lot of the things that I've seen or that I would suggest are actually really simple. They're not, people sort of, whenever the words reasonable adjustments are mentioned, people sometimes think, oh, it's going to be expensive, we haven't got the budget for it, it's going to be a real hassle to put in place. Very often it's not. Certainly in my experience, the smallest things can make the biggest difference. So some things like, noise cancelling headphones, perhaps if someone's sensitive to noise, sitting in an area of the office that is quieter, perhaps being able to, you know, some flexibility in their working. So maybe being able to work from home a couple of days a week or entirely. I mean, it will depend on the job role. It will depend on the employer. What's reasonable for one organisation may not be reasonable for another. You know, for larger organisations will have more resources. So what's reasonable for a very large organisation may not be reasonable for a much smaller one. But there's all sorts of really sort of quite small things that people can do. Another is not just flexibility regarding where somebody works, but some flexibility around their how they schedule their work. So just as an example, we all have times of day when we work better than other times of day. So some people work much better in the mornings and they might feel tired in the afternoons or evenings. For some people, it's the other way around. So if you have some flexibility over how you arrange your work and you are able to concentrate much better in the mornings, you might want to schedule tasks that require more thinking or more energy in the mornings, and perhaps lighter tasks in the afternoons or a time of day when you find it slightly harder to concentrate. So giving people a bit of flexibility, if possible. I mean, I know that won't work for all jobs. There's a lot of assistive technology out there. There's, you know, things that didn't exist years and years ago. So there's software that could help dyslexic people, for example. There's just sort of lots and lots of things that can be really helpful. Sometimes you might have to be a wee bit creative, you know. I think sometimes people don't always know what's helpful for them or for their team members. Some of the work that I do is around coaching. So I will coach people who are perhaps having difficulties in the workplace and helping them find some strategies that can help them with the areas that they're finding difficult. And also helping them become more aware of their strengths. You know, very often people themselves are focused on what they're finding difficult. And sometimes when I ask people about their strengths, you know, I just get a blank look. It's like, well, I don't have any strengths. Like, yes, you do. You know, everybody has strengths. So it's about helping people recognize what their strengths are and can they make more use of them in the workplace. So, you know, or in their job. So yeah, there's lots of things that people can do. And very often they're really quite small and they don't cost anything. So it might just be that you might need to think about it a little bit. But yeah, there's lots of things people can do.
No, I can get that. I can't be creative on a Monday morning. It's just not a creative time. So I genuinely cannot do any sort of writing or putting together slides or a presentation or task on a Monday. It's just not going to happen. Not going to happen at all. No, that's more a Friday afternoon task, which is probably why, I don't know if they still do it, but Google, massive company, obviously, they used to have this thing, they might still have it, where their staff, they're allowed to work on a personal passion project on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, yeah. I've heard
which is owned
that,
by Google. So you don't own it, but you can work on something to research and development your own project. And a lot of their products have come from that because that's a time when people are going to be creative on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I have heard of that actually. No, I really like the idea of that, just being able to work on your own projects and use your own creativity and see what you come up with.
Let's talk about your training. In terms of your business, how are you currently getting clients coming to you, and what sort of people do you work with?
Almost all of my work is around neurodiversity. So my background, well, I've had quite a varied background. I'm sort of somebody who has never stayed in any one job for a huge length of time, which is quite common in a lot of people with ADHD.
That's not a good thing to announce on a CV, is it?
It's funny because for some people that can be a big black mark against your name, but for others,
2 years and I'm gone.
They recognise that when you move around, you do actually pick up lots of skills and knowledge from lots of different employers. So my more recent background is in the housing sector. So I'm actually working with quite a number of housing associations running neurodiversity training sessions for them. I also work with small business owners themselves and do some coaching with them to help them make the most of their strengths and to run their business in a way that is sustainable for them. You know, burnout is something that is quite common in neurodivergent people. I mean, obviously it can affect anybody. But I think because a lot of neurodivergent people are masking a lot of the time, that can really take its toll. It can be exhausting. So helping people to run their business or do their job in a way that's sustainable for them is something that I look at within my coaching. I also work with other sort of charities and other sort of smaller organisations as well. Again, a mixture of training and coaching. Some of my coaching clients come to me through organisations that I've worked with. So I might go in and deliver a training session, and then they might contact me sometimes months later to say, oh, we've got 1 or 2 employees who could benefit from some coaching. Can you work with them? I'm also an associate coach with an organisation called Genius Within. They do a huge amount of work around neurodiversity. So some of my coaching work comes from them as well. And that's been great because I get to work with people from all different sectors, different companies, completely different jobs, you know, some very senior people, chief execs, other people who are perhaps at the very start of their career and just kind of getting their foot in the door. So it's really varied, which I love. I like working with lots of different people. So so the work comes from a variety of places. Sometimes people just find me on LinkedIn, or they might sort of stumble across my website and get in touch with me then. I tend to find that people who have found me on LinkedIn, I think a lot of people say this, that they tend to follow me for quite a long time before they get in touch. So they need to get to sort of feel as though they know me a bit more. So usually I find that if people have contacted me through LinkedIn, then they have usually been following me for about a year, if not more, and just been sort of watching what I've been doing, the kinds of things that I'm posting, and then they might get in touch. But it's very rare for someone to contact me having just found me on LinkedIn or somewhere else on websites. Sometimes people, I'm also on Instagram. I don't do as much with Instagram, but sometimes people find me there as well. So I think having an online presence helps. To begin with, when I first started out, it felt very uncomfortable. But when I realised that visibility can really help to bring in work, to help bring in clients, then I do think that's really important. Partly being visible, but also being consistent in that visibility as well. So putting yourself out there, going on podcasts like this, talking at events, I do quite a lot of networking as well. And whilst most of the networking events I go to are for other small business owners, so they're unlikely to hire me themselves, but they may well know somebody who does. So I have the work coming in roundabout ways through people I've connected with at networking events. So so work comes from a variety of different places, which is really nice, actually. I like that. I like the fact that it comes from different places. And it's nice when people come back to me. So, the example I gave about organisations that have hired me to do a training course, and then come back to me to ask if I can coach some of their employees. That is really nice to hear from them again and to sort of maintain that relationship. So so that's been great when people come back to me more than once. So hopefully that means I'm doing a good job.
It certainly does. You just said some magic words there as well when you were talking about being seen online. You were talking about consistency.
Yeah.
which is a massively important word, because there's a lot of people, as you say, think it feels weird posting stuff on LinkedIn. I don't know what to write about. I don't know what to say. But if you are consistent with it, and you are saying the same message and talking about the same subjects as presumably you are with neurodiversity, people will follow you, see that's what you talk about. You are the expert in that. So when they, I do need somebody to help me with that, they know to come to you because they feel like they already know you. They've seen everything you write about. And when you talked about networking groups as well, I mean, you've cracked it straight away. There's loads of people go to networking groups and don't understand. You mentioned there's lots of small businesses in the room. People will go there and say, well, these aren't my target clients. There's no point me going to these. They're not going to be able to hire me. It's not about that. It's not about going there and selling to the room. It's about who they know. The accountant there might have 200, 300 clients. How many of those might be housing associations that will be able to use you? Oh, actually, 4 or 5 of them. That's the point of going to those things. So, I mean, I think you've cracked that. A lot of people don't understand that. They go all the time and they just don't get it.
Yeah, it's taken me a while, and I must admit I felt very uncomfortable about all of it. I'm not somebody who sort of naturally put themselves out there, but when you're running your own business, you have to. You know, if I just kind of sit in my spare room every day and just potter away in front of my laptop, nobody's going to know I exist. So, you know, it was a case of if I want to do this and I want to do it well, I have to put myself out there. So I was talking to somebody this morning, actually, who's recently set up her own business, and I was just sort of sharing a few stories. And, you know, you don't have to kind of throw yourself into it straight away. If it's something that makes you feel quite anxious or uncomfortable, you know, but something like LinkedIn, you can just start by liking a few posts, you know, connecting with a few people, liking their posts, then building up to commenting on people's posts, and then eventually posting yourself. But I think just, you know, that whole consistency, it's about getting yourself out there consistently, but also what you were saying there about having a consistent message. You know, I think I didn't fully understand that when I first started. You know, I didn't really know who my ideal client was, and trying to appeal to too many people. And then you realize quite quickly that just doesn't work. You know, it doesn't mean you can't work with other people, but in terms of your marketing or you're getting your message out there, that consistency in your messaging is really important as well. And I think with networking as well, what that's given me is being part of a community. You know, so I think when you reframe how you see networking, because I think when people go into networking events and they think, I'm just going in there to see what work I can get, you know, lots of people do that and they walk away disappointed. But what I found is that by not thinking about it like that, thinking about what I can offer other people as well. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that very often I walk into a room and within minutes I'm talking to somebody else with ADHD. You know, we just seem to gravitate towards each other.
Like a magnet.
Or if I introduce myself and say what I do, people come and tell me their stories. You know, people want to talk, they want to share their stories. So it's about being part of the community. I've made some really good friends at networking events, people that I've got to know. We're unlikely to use each other's services, but that doesn't matter. You know, you've got people around you, because running your own business is hard. You know, it can be really hard. It can be isolating. But when you have other people around you who understand what it's like, then that can be really helpful as well. So I think there's so many advantages to networking, no matter how uncomfortable you might feel in the very beginning when you walk into a room full of people that you don't know. One of the nice things is that I live in Edinburgh, which is quite a small city. So when I go into networking events, then I always meet new people, but I always recognise 1 or 2 people as well. So there's always a few familiar faces in there. And that's really nice that I've been able to build up those relationships with people. Because that's also about business as well. It's building relationships with people, and you know, for them to get to know you and trust you and think, you know, I might recommend you to somebody. So I think there's no downsides to it.
Yeah, business is about relationships because people buy from people.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And as you beautifully touched on there as well, a lot of people will go to networking events because they want to grow their business. They want to get sales. They want to get new clients. But they'll go back and they'll stay because of the relationships. They'll go and stay because of the advice. I mean, where else can you go to a group of people and speak to a solicitor that you know well, that you can go, oh, can you just, I've just had this problem. Could you give me some advice on that? And you'll get free advice from them. You can speak to an accountant. You can speak to a mortgage broker that you can ask for advice. My mortgage is due for renewal. What do you think the best options are for me? And it doesn't cost you anything because you're getting this support. Whereas as a business owner on your own, you're isolated. You don't get this normally. So they're great for that.
Yeah, definitely. No, I love the fact that I've met so many people I would never have met otherwise, if I hadn't gone to these networking events, people who are doing all sorts of different things. And it really opens your eyes to the number of sort of businesses that are out there that you've never even heard of, so some meeting people who are doing things completely different to what I'm doing, but we might still share some of the same struggles. And it's really nice being able to share that with people and also to celebrate some of your achievements as well. If things are going well, it's lovely to be able to speak to other people who get, who understand that high when perhaps you've got a new client or something has gone really well, not just when times are hard. So it's great just meeting lots of new people who you probably wouldn't come into contact with anywhere else.
And speaking of meeting new people, because we are pretty much out of time now. Speaking of meeting new people, anyone that's listening to this thinking, I would love to speak to you and find out more about what you do, maybe get you to come in and train some of my staff or put some talks on, or maybe speak at one of my events, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Either through my website, which is aileencarson.com, or I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. And my email address is aileen@aileencarson.com. So those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
Aileen, thank you very much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.